it all starts with you, and it all starts with your ability to think through what you need to do as a person in your own personal leadership, and realize like you have to be an example. And if you can't do those things, then put someone in place that can.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Everyone, welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines, to those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me is Florida's favorite resident, should I say, Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning as we're recording this? Introduce our sponsors, our guests, and our topic.
Sure. So good morning, Dan Gordon, PCO bookkeepers and M&A specialists. We do brokerage work and CFO work, tax work, whatnot in the lawn and pest space. Sponsors, we have a marketing sponsor who, for all your marketing needs, that would be Coalmarch, coalmarch.com/podcast to claim a free month of their services. If you visit that, that's coalmarch.com/podcast. PestSure, they are a insurance company that services or serves the pest and lawn industry for general liability, workers' comp, auto, which real hot topics, and I believe they do a few others, EPLI and whatnot. But if you're interested, that would be pestsure.com. And then we have Voice for Pest. They are voice solutions for the PCO of any size, coast to coast. To learn more, it would be voiceforpest.com/podcast. How was that? Did I do okay?
You know what? That was pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good. I mean, like the main thing is we got the bean counters in there, so I think we're good.
Yeah. If you're interested in joining one of our peer groups, we just actually put another one together. The first meeting is in July, which is terrific. And usually you need about 8 to 10 people to do a peer group. So if you're interested in one of those, go back and listen to episode 136. Our facilitator, David Billingsley, was on. We should have David back on pretty soon just to kind of give us an update on the peer groups, because he's pretty excited about it, and the folks who have joined it, they seem to be pretty excited about it as well. And our very special guest this time is Donnie and me.
So special.
Yes.
In so many ways.
we're gonna talk about something that Donnie knows a little something about, being this, it's funny because we use Zoom to record this, and but when we do our meetings with Marisa, who's our producer, it comes up as his picture. It says Major Donnie Shelton. By the way, thank you for your service.
Oh, goodness.
And anyway, so we're going to talk about some leadership from the trenches. So it's kind of interesting. So I've known Donnie for a long time and Triangle for a long time. And it seems that leadership is like showering. You got to keep doing it. It doesn't stay done, right? And I've watched Donnie subscribe to a lot of these leadership techniques, these MBA de jour leadership things, and then move on to the next. Although he's been pretty consistent for the last few years. And so based on all that, we decided to do a little leadership episode, from authority to ownership, transfer your business culture. And I'm looking at the outline, and it looks like Donnie did some significant research. I mean, this guy, listen, he doesn't do anything half-assed.
By the way, if you're listening to this, Dan he would never give me a comment, but I mean a compliment. But I will say this: thank you, by the way, Dan. I wanted to do this topic because it's kind of interesting to me. From authority to ownership. And the reason I want to talk about it is because, we go to a lot of conferences. I'm sure our listeners do as well. And it's always interesting to hear, like, you really understand what a business is like when you listen to the owner. And I think it's funny, and I probably shouldn't laugh because it's terrible of me But you get someone up like a leader or a manager, and they talk about, well, I did this and they did that, and they're basically talking about how they're taking care of business. And ultimately, I think the part that they miss is they realize, or at least I see, is that's actually not great leadership. In the midst of them, explaining and maybe even bragging about how they're whipping their staff into shape. It really is. If you're having to use authority in any part of your business. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't make decisions as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as an owner, even as a manager. That's not what I'm insinuating. But what I am saying is that if you're resorting to authority in any part of your leadership, you're probably doing it the wrong way, or you have the wrong person, and you need to make a change anyway. So this whole idea that I'm not, certainly this episode is not making the assumption that you have this authoritative culture. But if you're listening to this and you do, this might be very well one of the best episodes, or probably one of the most insightful episodes that you'll ever listen to change your business. Because ultimately, that might have worked in the 50s. It may even worked in the 40s. I can tell you by experience, and I can tell you by bad experience, it does not work today. And if it does, and it's working for you, I think that there's probably a higher cost that you're paying than you might even realize. So with that, let's walk into this episode. There's several points that we have here. I don't know that we're going to get through all of them, but when we talk about this whole idea of from authority to ownership, and I don't know, sometimes I hate talking about leadership because it's so broad, right? And it's easy to kind of get into this whole idea of people fall in love with it, and you do these three things and you're going to be just fine. Or I kind of view leadership like parenting. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the reason I
I
say
think,
that is because there ain't no there's no one formula that's perfect, right? You know what I mean? Like,
and some kids will respond to certain
right.
ways to parent, and other kids will not, and they need other types of leadership. And I agree with you. You know what's interesting is when I got into business, so I worked at an accounting firm for a while, and then I got into business. And my lens was everything was through a spreadsheet or a budget, or how much is this going to cost? And, basically, people, when I looked at people as headcount. And when I went to work for, I sold my company to a guy named Ed Bradbury, who ran Viking up in New Jersey. And, it's now part of Anticimex, and Ed is long retired. But I watched Ed build a following of the staff who would, any one of them would take a bullet for this guy. And when I'd go in with my budgets, he'd be like, that's nice. But he'd almost have like a chessboard, and all the players were, which space should everybody be in, as opposed to how much is it going to cost? And I'll let you start in from there. But I've learned over the years that it's, if I can get somebody to take a bullet for me, that's leadership, not, if I can
Yeah.
bean count.
Well, I mean, and I think it is important that we start with that because, I personally think about let's first of all start with leadership in general and leaders, and then we'll kind of run into a little bit how to do it and what that means, and then ultimately transforming your culture if you have, let's just say, a less than ideal leadership culture. But when we talk about a leader, for me personally, that's someone who interacts with other people, who has to influence them towards a common goal. Now that's a very broad definition, but that to me is what that is what a leader does. And I love, Jocko Willink. I mean, listen, I'm a huge fan of him. If you've ever listened to the podcast, you know that I am. He has a quote that and I'm going to butcher it when I say it, but I just remember it, and it was hilarious. He goes, the line between leadership and manipulation is very thin. and what the difference is your motivation, right? I mean, ultimately, if you're influencing people for your own selfish reasons, that's probably manipulation. If you're influencing people for the betterment of a cause of them, of some sort of cause, then that's leadership. And so to me, that's the definition I use. I think it's the one that makes the most sense to me. It's the one I've observed the most. But ultimately, when you think about it and you use that definition, that means everyone in your business, and I mean everyone, even, frontline staff are leaders. I mean, they're leaders of customers, right? They're leaders of their peers. I mean, so it applies to everyone. And so there's this whole idea of command and control and authority versus ownership, and what does that mean? And so ultimately, coming back to this idea of, like, what I said at the beginning, which is, when we talk about leadership and being a leader, I kind of I equate it to parenting, because there is no magic formula, right? There is no, you're going to do these three things, and then you're going to be the perfect leader for your organization, or to this person or that person. It's just, people are crazy. Legitimately, I'm crazy, you're crazy, we're all crazy, right? And we're all unique, and it's just very, very difficult to say, to put every person into a box, because there's just so much complexity there that it just doesn't work. And so the very first thing comes in is like, well, all right, if it's really that complicated and it's really that, broad, well, then how do you do this as an owner? And for me, I'm not saying that this is the right answer. This is my answer before I even say it. The best leaders I have ever come across in any aspect of my life, whether it's been in the military, I consider my mother a very good leader, right? I mean, really, really good leaders in our industry, in the pest industry. Everyone I've seen has been an example, right? They've been an absolute excellent example to follow, meaning that, the people that I respect and the people that I want to follow, they've always had this aura about them where, and I hate to use this term, but it's true. They eat their own dog food, right? And likewise, the worst leaders I've ever seen have been leaders who do the opposite, right? They want everyone else to do the work, but they're not willing to either get in the trenches, or they're not willing to live what they're trying to get other people to do. And so, the whole idea behind leadership is that people actually want to follow you, not necessarily you're driving them. And so, I think every successful business will thrive or fall on the quality of its leadership. And listen, Triangle's been around for, oh my gosh, it's going to be 20 years next year. And we have certainly gone through multiple variations of this. I would love to sit here and tell you that, at Triangle, we have had fantastic leadership all throughout the years. And the truth would be is that we have not, right? We've had good leadership and we've had poor leadership. We've had amazing leadership and we've had amazingly terrible leadership. And listen, that all falls on me. But ultimately, when you look at how your business is doing, what your culture's like, I've in, again, another author, one that we actually had on the podcast a few years ago. He has a quote, and listen, that was a little weird, but the guy, Michael Gerber, he one of his points, and I don't know if he came up with it, but it was in the book E-Myth. He said, the business takes on the personality of the owner. It's a reflection of the owner.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so if you're someone who is the real deal, you care about people, you try to do the right thing, you're looking, you're trying to be a good example. And listen, no one's perfect, and I certainly don't want to overplay this, right? Much like what you said about, finance, like your goggles were from finance. I mean, if you're that kind of person, then that, generally speaking, the business is going to take on your personality. Likewise, if you're all about number one, cover your butt, right?
Right.
And get other people to do things that you don't like to do, not willing to take on risks, not, and don't back people up, of course, your organization is going to take that as well. And so, I mean, I think if anything, leadership is absolutely the foundation, and that foundation all starts with you and, who you are and what you're all about. And unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately, because, there's a lot of folks who own businesses that are not leaders.
Right. Yep.
And they think that there's somehow that there's some sort of detour, since they're the owner, that they get a pass on this. And you might, if you can put a real leader in your place, but it doesn't negate the fact that this piece, this component, has to be in your business. People have to have someone to follow.
Let me ask you a question. This is not in your outline, so I'm not sure if you've thought about it, but what I've noticed is that small businesses, if you don't have leadership but you have good organizational skills, you can build a business. But big businesses must have a good leader but
Hmm.
not all big businesses have a big leader. How do you grow without good leadership?
Well, I'm going to say this is that you can't. And, I think the challenge that I certainly have experienced and I've seen is that when a business is small, um, the required performance is pretty minimal. And what I mean by that, as far as leadership, right? I mean, listen, when I first got into pest control, I was full of, I'm just going to call it crap.
I was going to say, I remember you were beating me down on my fees, and I was really,
Oh gosh, I was so like, I was full up on like what I'd read in books, what I'd been taught in officer training school, and those things probably worked. And not probably, they did work in the military because everyone that followed you was they were kind of forced to, right? And they all kind of came from the same standard background, and it was super easy to lead them. And then I got in the real world, man, and I learned pretty quickly like that did not work at all. And I have some pretty funny stories that if we ever talk, and I'm talking to our listeners here, I could certainly share and just dumb mistakes that I made. But you're right, Dan. I mean, when you're smaller, you can certainly get to a certain level, just servicing accounts and doing your thing. But as the business gets larger, the need for leadership gets greater and greater. And I think that's because of the level of chaos that's associated with scaling a business. It's just massive chaos. And the part that's overlooked the most, and listen, we struggle with this. So if you're listening to this and you think I have things figured out, I'm talking from doing things wrong and messing this up. The part that I feel like a lot of people struggle with, and I would put Triangle in this category, is that teaching frontline and middle managers real leadership skills because it gets very difficult to do in the midst of the chaos, right? I mean, I say this all the time, right? We all want to talk about leadership and then we all want to have personal growth and there's all these things that we want to do. But the fact is that, day to day business, you got to make the sausage, right? We got to go out and we got to service stops and we got to take care of customers. And it gets very, very easy to forget how critical it is to teach people those skills because listen, they don't come in baked with those things. I mean, some do, but I think it's a lot less common than most believe or even think. And so, to your point, Dan, I think, when you're smaller, this is not as big of an issue. And a lot of times it's because the entrepreneur is so involved in the business, like they can just
Mm-hmm.
make things happen, right? I mean, it's like this did happen. I can go. I'll actually go out and service that account, or I'll go and do that. And when you get larger, like your skill set has to completely change, and you have to be all about people.
Yep.
And I mean that, like legitimately, I mean that. Like you're all about people. That's all you really should be concerned with. And and some people never make that transition, right? They want to talk about chemical, or they want to get into the P&L, or they want to get into these other things. And not that those things aren't important, but a real leader understands their role is nothing but people. That's all they do is the right person in the right seat. Did they get it? Want have the capacity to do it? I mean, do they deliver our values, and are they going to get us to the next level? Those are really the conversations that you should be having with yourself. So leadership is the foundation. Is number one. The second point is, and I see this a lot, and I get asked this question a lot, which is, well, what leadership system do you recommend? Or how should I build my leadership? And this kind of goes in with the first point, which is, and I heard this a long time ago, and we'll link up an article on this. But the fact is that leadership development is personal development. Like you can't disconnect the two. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like sometimes people think, "Oh, I'm a great leader," and I can be a really crappy person. Well, think about how much of an oxymoron is that. I mean, because
Mm-hmm.
surely the people that report to you don't see that, right?
Right.
you
Right.
know, I mean, they don't, like they don't
No,
know that you're,
you have to be genuine, right? So if you're going to give
yeah.
something away, there's no strings attached. If you're, um, you're not looking at it, you're not looking at people. I once heard somebody talk about a guy that I used to work for that he wasn't a good leader, and he said he treats everyone like they're icons on his desktop. He opens them when he needs them, and he closes them when he's done, and that's it. And that's not a leader, right? But I thought that was a pretty cool parallel.
Yeah.
That was a good example.
Well,
Uh,
we have an article up here, and and I'm going to reference it on the website, and we'll put this outline up. But the article is why self leadership is the most critical part to success. And I really do believe this. If you want to be a good leader, the very first person you need to lead is yourself. And uh, I know that sounds obvious, and that sounds like, well, yeah, of course. But the fact is that if you can't own your own behavior, right? Have the if you can't have the behaviors that you're wanting to instill, like you really don't have those, it's impossible, right? Because again,
Hmm.
um, people can't follow you if you're not going that direction, right? They're going to follow you wherever you go. And so I think, and if you spend any time with me, I'm a huge fan of discipline. I'm not perfect at it, and I try to be disciplined. But I want my business to be disciplined because I want us to consistently be excellent, and I realize that comes through. I mean, listen, Bobby Knight said it best, right? Everyone has the will to win. Very few people have the will to prepare. Right. And it
Hmm.
all comes down to that day-to-day discipline of teaching your people, you know, how to go about being disciplined, how to go about, taking care and taking ownership of things. And if you're constantly blaming other people, blaming the economy, blaming someone else, especially when it's a decision that you made, I don't know if you've ever observed this, Dan, but I've seen it tons, even in my own company, where a leader will make a decision and then it doesn't work out. And then whose fault is it? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
because it, and likewise, I mean, we've all seen this, and I'm sure if you're listening to me, you've probably worked for someone like this, where um, a leader does something and they take credit when they actually had nothing to do with it, right? And it
Right.
should absolutely be the opposite, right? When you
Yep.
talk about ownership, it's like when things go wrong, it's my fault. When things go right, congratulations, you did a fantastic job.
By the way, if you want to take a look at the show notes, we're going to post this. Donnie had put up some really good Harvard Business Review, Why People Follow the Leader, The Power of Transference, Forbes, Why Self-Leadership is Essential to Success. And let's talk about what is this? Entrepreneur managers, are you ready to move up? These
Yeah.
responsibilities you need to prepare for, and also this millennials. I want to hit this before we finish, because
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So let's start with, the whole, I mean, I think we've kind of already beat this, right? But ultimately, when we talk about if you're going to instill ownership in an organization, you know, I certainly believe that this starts with, and listen, if you've not read Extreme Ownership, I think you probably should. That book
It's a
was,
great book.
it's a
Great book.
fantastic book. It goes through this,
Audio
and
book, right? Or listen to the audio book, very
yeah,
whatever. It's just
exactly. Another one, and this is one that I have all my managers read. It's called, a leadership strategy and tactics, which is kind of the, extreme ownership is kind of the concept. Leadership strategy and tactics is very good for kind of your middle managers, because it gets into very specific situations where, a middle manager is a very difficult job, Dan. I mean, it is
hmm
probably one of the hardest jobs there is out there. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Like as an entrepreneur, you take on all the risk, but if you do it right, it's fun and it's not terribly difficult. It can be at times, but it's not.
hmm
But a middle manager job, like it is just it's constant pressure, right? Because
Right.
you've got two bosses essentially,
You're
right? You have
serving your master and you're serving the people who work
yeah, and
for you,
so
you know.
so anyway, in that book, it teaches it teaches people how to not only lead down the chain but lead up the chain, how to deal with situations that you can't necessarily control but you can influence. And so, in any case, getting back to are you ready to move up? Ultimately, it comes down to teaching people how to take extreme ownership, and I hate to use that term, but to admit mistakes, and really what this is about is it's teaching people how to come to terms with their ego and how to control it. It really is, right? Because
Hmm.
if you can if you can own your mistakes and be vulnerable and be like, you know what, yep, I screwed that up, and publicly acknowledge it, and show that you're going to take ownership, and then not only from that, be okay with it and be willing to show that, then people are going to trust you, and from that they're going to realize like it's okay for me to make mistakes, because ultimately what happens is if everyone gets into this CYA, if they get into that kind of mindset, then what happens is that problems just continue to happen, right? The same problems continue to happen because no one made those mistakes and no one brought it out to fix it because everyone's either afraid of exposing it or they're afraid to acknowledge it or even afraid to own it because they're afraid of what's going to happen from that. So when we talk about ownership starts with you, that's a great article that talks about that. It talks about how, you really should be focused on personal accountability. You should be owning your mistakes. And really, it's all about as a leader. And listen, this is one that I really struggled with, if I'm being completely honest. When I first got into business, I had a massive ego. Dan can tell you, I probably still have a massive ego. Yeah. And you know what? It took me a really long time to even become aware of it, right? A lot of times you don't even know it. You're like, oh yeah, I'm humble. It takes a lot of humility to talk about how humble I am. Do you know what
Right.
I'm saying? I mean, it's like, that really is kind of the key part. The other point that you wanted to get to here, and again, we'll link up that article, is this whole thing of external narratives. This one just kills me, right?
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, how many times have you gone to a conference like, oh, this new generation, they don't know how to work and they don't work and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you might be right. You might be right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that may very well be the case, but it's what you got. So you can sit around and you can complain about it, right? And or you can understand that that responsibility to train people and to educate them and to lead them squarely falls on your shoulders. And oftentimes when you're saying things like that, what you're really saying is, I'm not willing to take the time to train
Mhm.
these folks, to lead them. Because listen, at the end of the day, generations are generations, but they all want the same thing, right? They all want to be successful. They all want to feel like they're winning. They all want to like have security. And ultimately, you can create all of those things, but that's your responsibility. And don't sit around and cry because, well, I have to start at a lower level to train these people because, at the end of the day, there are going to be companies out there that will. And while they may have a different take on it and they may have different experiences, I mean, listen, I have certainly fell into this at times where I'm like complaining about it and I'll be like, well, I mean, it's like the whole thing of, you know, you're sitting around and people are complaining about their staff. Well, who hired them? Who leaves them on staff? And then who doesn't train them?
But how
Those
about
are
that?
real.
How about the external stuff like, oh my gosh, the economy? Well,
Right.
the fact of the matter is, listen, if you're there are certain industries that are definitely affected by the economy. Our industry, I don't want to say that we're not affected, but look at 2008 and 2009. We came right through that.
Right.
We've had ups and downs. Pest control is recession resistant, so you can't go, oh, the economy. In
Hmm.
fact, the economy, when it's really humming, that's not our best time because we
Right.
can't find anybody to work for us. When it's horrible, we can't find customers, right? When it's right in the
Right.
middle where it's been for the past 15 years, that's a good spot, you know?
I'm going to have to look up. I got to look this up, but Jim Collins is one of my favorite authors. He wrote Good to Great and those types of things. But he did a research study, and if you look at some of the most iconic companies ever created, they were all created in bad situations. Ford was that way. Walt Disney was that way. They were all created in a recession, right, or even a depression. And so,
Hmm.
the economy, they're always excuses, but there's always an answer as well. So don't, again, the external narratives are there, really as excuses, and you just can't fall into
Hmm.
that. So,
Hmm.
all right, I know we're getting close to the end here, and there's one more thing I want to talk about because I think it's important, and I'm not going to have time to go through the entire outline. And this one is probably what I consider to be the most important point out of all the things that we talked about, and it's called relationships first, accountability second. And listen, if you're married, have ever been married, I'm going to say something that if this doesn't resonate with you, you might want to rethink your marriage, right? So for me, this is what I've learned in my own marriage. When the relationship's bad or the relationship's not where it needs to be, shutting the freaking door is a problem. I mean, seriously, anything and everything you can think of is just a discussion. It's just painful. It's terrible to talk about. Likewise, when the relationship's great, we can walk through hell together, right? And what I mean by that is that, ultimately in any kind of leadership situation, relationship situation, it's all about that relationship first, right? The relationship has to be intact. And the reason I say that is if you're going to lead anyone, if you think you can do that without a relationship, like I'm not here
Hmm.
to be their friend, I'm not here to be that. And I'm not saying like there's a fine line, but if you can't get that relationship right, simple things like shutting the door is going to be a problem, right?
Yeah, no,
Versus,
mutual respect, whether you want to be their friend or not, but you've got to respect each other when that
yeah,
stops.
yeah, yeah. And listen, we've had Patrick Lencioni on our podcast, and he wrote a book called The Advantage, and in that book, he talks about the whole idea of healthy conflict, and how conflict is good, and how you should actually promote that at your business. Now, if you hear this, and I will tell you right now, in an authoritative type company, that's like a four-letter word, right? Conflict. Oh, no, 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 because there's the authority's going to come in and, clean everything out, and how dare you challenge me? But the fact is if you have no conflict, you are ripe for mediocrity, and you're ripe to go out of business, because the fact is that you need people to feel comfortable enough and be comfortable enough in a relationship that they feel okay to call out things that they don't either A, don't understand, or B, that you may not see. And
Mm.
if you can't handle that kind of conflict, if you don't have a strong enough relationship that people feel comfortable doing that, it really is, gosh, I can't believe I'm going to say this. This is not a dad joke. It's a disadvantage, not
Mm.
an advantage, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's all about, you got to build those strong relationships first. Once you have the relationships in place, now you can, and I'm not telling you don't hold people accountable. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, if you lead with a stick and all about accountability with no relationship, you will get compliance for a period. It will never last long. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Like you will never get what I would consider to be a high performance organization. Um,
I like that. Will they take a bullet for you? If the answer is yes, then you got it. If they won't, no.
right, right,
That's important.
right. We've got an article here we'll link up as well. It's from the Harvard Business Review. It's called Connect and Then Lead. And again, if you read any kind of major, what I would consider to be a good leadership book, there's tons of them out there. They all say the same thing.
Hmm.
Listen, leadership is influence, and influence are relationships. That's the only way you're going to influence. Now, you can with authority, but we're talking about over the long term. And, there are things that you can do like one-on-one meetings, looking at, again, taking I mean, in my case, I've been in situations where someone has really done something wrong, and I went in and said, "Look, yeah, this was my fault," and I quote unquote, as the leader, took the bullet. And people really come to respect someone who can get in front of things, because ultimately, again, you want to have that ability without even having you want to be able to influence, not be the authority. And again, you are an authority. I want to be careful in how I'm talking about this, but if you're having to use authority to change behavior, then
Hmm.
there's a problem. Does that distinction make difference?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely,
yeah. So, all right.
definitely.
So, which
But
last? Go
there
ahead.
is an article here that I love the title. Five rules for managing superstars and their egos. That's how you manage salespeople. So,
Yes, yes. So that's at the end. This was point number 8, and I'm jumping ahead, which is winning as a team is not individuals. Um, we remember was it SunTrust? I think it was. Or was it Bank of America? Like, remember the big banking? I think it might have been SunTrust, where they had these high commission, high pressure sales goals, and people were like, basically, they were screwing the customers and they were screwing the company to get their
oh, it
own.
was Wells Fargo.
That was Wells Fargo's. That's what it was. Yeah, yeah, Wells Fargo. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, you don't, if the it's easy for this to happen in a business, especially as you get larger, right? Someone is like feeling really good about themselves because their department's winning or they're winning, but if the company's not winning, it doesn't really matter. And so, when you have superstars and you've got people who are really ambitious, which is great, the main thing there is that you just want to ensure, number one is that you place their ego in the team, right? You place their ego, not, and that's a hard thing to do, because oftentimes we want to, like, you did this in this position or you did this here, but ultimately, to manage their ego, it's like you have to manage the ego in the sense of they get their win in the team, not in their individual performance, although that is an important factor. And again, these are all gosh, I feel terrible talking about it because there's so many like, well, in this case, it would be individual performance. In this case, it would be the team. But any case, there's a good article we have linked up. This is from Inc. magazine. Like Dan said, 5 rules for managing superstars and their egos, and it kind of talks through that. So, in any case, the whole idea behind this episode is this: if you're having to resort to, or if you have a culture of a very authoritative type of culture, and listen, if you're listening to this and you think there might be a little bit of that, I just want to encourage you to read some of the resources that we've put up here. Certainly read the book Extreme Ownership. Certainly read the book The Advantage. There is a better way that you could definitely get in the way that Dan says it. Get your people to take a bullet for you, because I just believe that these days of these old 1950, 1960, my way or the highway, like that,
It doesn't work anymore.
it doesn't work
That
anymore,
doesn't work
and it
at all.
just never will. I mean, it's just not who you're dealing with, and the reality of it is there's just way too many options these days. And even if you get a smaller version of it working, mediocrity is at best that you'll ever get it. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, you need all of your people, not 20 or
All
50%.
right. Before we close, do you have, and we didn't talk about this, do you have a good story where somebody wasn't a good leader to you? And I have a really good one, but like somebody who you were kind of like, man, that didn't jive well.
I mean, what you want military? What do you want? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, let me give you one and then you think about
okay,
it
I'll
while
think
I'm
of
going.
it.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So,
for sure.
so I was an accountant working in a tax department at a big accounting firm, and most of the consultants in my department were lawyers. But I was in there as an accountant, but occasionally they would have me do research and I'd have to write an opinion on, a stance and whatnot. So I wrote this opinion, which I thought was really well written, gave it to my manager, who's an attorney. And this is before, so you can laugh at me and tell me how old I am. So it was a printout, and he did his thing, and he called me into his office, and he held it up to me, and it had all of these red circles, like he was my first grade teacher. It was like there was so much blood on that page. And then he took it and he rolled it into a ball and threw it at me and said, "Can
Oh,
you do me a favor and go out and do this right?" And I was just like,
wow.
I was 24 years old, and I was like, holy crap. And
Wow.
that was one of the things that I learned. You probably don't want to do that
Don't
if you
want to
want to
do.
be a good leader.
Well, you know what? I will do the opposite. I will share a story where I really screwed up. Um, and this was I felt so bad after this situation. This was very, very early. I'd been in business maybe a year and a half. And remember, I came from the military where hazing is cultural. Like, and not only hazing, but I mean like legitimate. And I know you've heard this story before, Dan, and I hate to tell it again, but it is, I just, to this day, I still cringe when I think of it. I actually did this. But, um, you know, in the military culture, it's just common, and I mean, you get it from day one. I mean, like you go to boot camp, for example. I mean, people are yelling at you and screaming at you and telling you all the stuff that you're doing wrong. And then as you get further along in the ranks, and it gets even more and more personal. And so I decide we're going to have a big barbecue for Triangle. We'd been in business for a year, maybe a little bit longer, maybe like a year and a couple of months. And as part of this, I'm going to grill some hot dogs and hamburgers, and I'm going to give out awards, and I'm going to give out like a funny award too. And man, oh man, I gave out this award to I only had 2 employees at the time. I had a young lady in the office, and I had another technician. And me and the other technician did the stops, and her name was Pam. She was in the office, and I gave her this kind of white elephant gift of like this bear or something, because she was just, and she was, man, like she was not pleasant before 10 a.m. And she'd come in, and I remember her screaming at Jeremy. She would always be super, well, kind of respectful to me. And she just was. And so I just kind of told a bunch of stories and given it, and everyone laughed and stuff like that. And we got done, and we went home that night. And Emily's my wife. She's like, Donnie, you can't do that. I'm like, it's fine. What do you know? It's nothing. And sure enough, man, I go in on Monday, and there's Pam's resignation, man. She did not. appreciate that one bit. And I just felt terrible. I mean, in any case, there's tons of examples that we all know. I think the big takeaway from this episode is that, if you really want to transform your culture and you want to create a company of owners, which I think is what most people are going to have to do these days, especially with the new generation, it all starts with you, and it all starts with your ability to think through what you need to do as a person in your own personal leadership, and realize like you have to be an example. And if you can't do those things, then put someone in place that can. It goes back to what I said before, where like if you inherited a business and this is just not who you want to be, then find someone who can, because ultimately, if you want to go to the next level, if you want to scale as a business, and listen, not all businesses are about getting bigger, but it is about getting better, right? And it is about progress. And, you've got to do that. So, all right, Dan, anything to add before we finish out here?
I think that's about it.
All right. Just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talked about today are available on the podcast website. Take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes. We always appreciate ratings and reviews, and Dan always appreciates complaints and just general complaining in general. So with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks. See ya. Bye.